A public hearing was not required for these regulations, but EOHLC has opted to hold this hearing to give as much opportunity for public comment as possible. That is the purpose of today's hearing. Now, we have a number of people in the room today. As I said, my name is Roman Montoya. We have Catherine Neal, who is ADU coordinator. And we have Philippe Zamberlini, who's a community assistance unit manager. We'll also have a number of EOHLC staff in the room helping with technology and listening in on your comments throughout the day. No one will be answering questions as a part of the public hearing. Our sole purpose is to take public comment and to take that back and to really think about that and to work what we learned into the regs. Staff attending, we're going to listen to your comments, as I said, and we'll take all of that back to Secretary of Housing and Livable Communities, Ed Augustus. So as a bit of a background, on August 6th, 2024, Governor Maura Healey signed the Affordable Homes Act into law. This historic legislation authorizes just over $5 billion in spending over the next 5 years, along with nearly 50 policy initiatives to address the housing crisis in Massachusetts. The Affordable Homes Act established a new law enabling property owners to build accessory dwelling units by right in all single-family zoning districts statewide. ADUs will help meet the state's growing housing needs and play a pivotal role in housing production in our state over the next 5 years, creating an estimated 8,000 to 10,000 new units of housing. The statute permits EOHLC to promulgate regulations to explain and clarify how the ADU statute works. I think it's important to note that the ADU law became a part of Section 3 of the Zoning Act, Chapter 40A, intentionally. The section was created by the Dover Amendment, which originally passed in 1950 as a part of the Zoning Act. It was intended to protect educational, religious, and agricultural uses from discriminatory zoning restrictions. ADUs that meet the definition of the new law, we call them now protected use ADUs, are now protected by that same body of law. These regulations were developed to help clarify key definitions and provide a concise statement of the relevant law that surrounds uses protected by the Dover Amendment and how that body of law will now be applied to the creation of protected use ADUs in the Commonwealth. And now back to Philippe. He'll share some more information about the format and process for today's hearing.
Thank you, Ray. So a little bit of information on the process. So written public comments, ULC opened an official written public comment period from December 20th, 2024 to today, January 10th, 2025. To ensure that all who wish to comment may do so, we will continue to accept any written comments that you may wish to submit until 11:59 p.m. today, January 10th, 2025. And for oral comments, today we will accept oral comments from all who wish to offer them. We made a public hearing registration form available on December 20th, 2024, and have received registrations for oral comments today. If you did not register to offer a public comment, but choose to make one before the end of today's hearing, you will be given an opportunity to do so. As for the format of today's hearing, all audio remotely is muted. The Zoom administrator has muted the audio for all persons attending this public hearing. The Zoom administrator will unmute individuals when it is their turn to offer comments. Please speak audibly so that the public hearing stenographer and EOHLC staff may take note of your oral public comments. Video is optional for attendees. This event is being recorded, so if you choose not to be recorded, please keep your video off. Screen sharing and video feed is disabled. As attendees, you will not be able to be seen on video unless if you are speaking, and you will not have the ability to mute or unmute your audio or screen share yourself. If you wish to speak as an attendee, the Zoom administrator will activate your video and audio when you are called to speak, and this will allow everyone attending to see and hear you. This change would not allow you to screen share. Once you have finished speaking, you will be muted and no longer be visible to others in the audience. Please note that the sharing of any inappropriate material will result in video or audio privileges being terminated. As for in-person comments, comments for those attending in person will be asked to come forth to the comment table here in the front and share their oral comments. Please speak audibly as well so that the public hearing stenographer and we, EOHLC staff, may take note of your oral public comments. When you finish your in-person comments, please promptly return to your seats so that we may call on to the next commenter. Now, in regards to the order of the oral comments, individuals who registered in advance of today's public hearing will be called first and in order of registration. Comments will switch between in-person and remote based on whether the person who will speak next in the order of registration is attending in person or remotely. If a commenter is called on and does not respond, they will be called upon again at a later point of the public hearing and be given the opportunity to speak and provide oral comments. UHLC may at times take elected officials and panels, including elected officials, out of order. For additional remote comments, remote attendees who did not register to speak in advance, but choose to do so during today's public hearing, may click on the raise hand feature on their Zoom that is on the bottom of your screen if you are watching on a computer, or in the more button if you are viewing this on a cell phone to be added to the speaking list. You may also chat our Zoom administrator directly saying that you now wish to speak so that we may add you to the list. Additional remote commenters will be added to the end of the oral comment speaking list in the order they are received. For in-person comment additions, any in-person attendees who did not register to make a comment in advance but choose to do so during today's public hearing may speak to any UHLC staff in the room or right outside in the hall to be added to the speaking list. Any additional in-person comments will also be added to the end of the oral comment speaking list in the order they are received. As for time limit, please limit your comments to 3 minutes so that all who wish to speak, who should be heard today, may have an opportunity to speak. UHLC will keep track of comment times. I will be keeping track of that. And I may call on speakers to end their comments if the oral comments exceed 3 minutes. At my discretion, the discretion of the moderator, and in accordance with open meeting laws and rules and regulations, elected officials may be granted additional time to speak. Any remote issues with the webinar today, we will try to assist you. If you have any problems in the Zoom, please send a Zoom chat to our Zoom administrator, Jack Burke. And if you have any questions in person, feel free to reach out to a staff member, either here in the room or right outside of the hall. Now, as for the hearing scheduled today, and some final housekeeping items before we open to the public comment process. Today's hearing is planned to run from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. However, we will, if necessary, extend the closing time of the hearing so that we may give all attendees who wish to make a public comment the ability to do so. The public hearing will take a brief lunch break at noon, at 12 p.m. noon, and resume the listening to your comments promptly at 12:30. So if you're on Zoom at noon, we're gonna take a quick break. Please come back at 12:30. Those here in person, at noon we'll take a break. If you haven't spoken yet, please come back at 12:30. For those in person, restrooms are located on the same floor here as the hearing room, just outside and past the main entrance doors in the main corridor, left of the entrance and to your right, if you're going straight down the hall as you exit the room. Water fountains are also available to the public, to folks that are in person, in the halls right outside this hearing room. As this is a hybrid public hearing, our microphones here, there's 2 in the front and in the back, will pick up all conversation in the room. Please refrain from speaking if you are in person throughout the public hearing to allow our remote attendees and stenographer to hear all comments being made in person. If you do need to take a call or speak to someone, you are welcome to use the main hall areas. As Roy has mentioned, there will be no response to oral comments or questions. The UHLC staff are present here today to listen to your oral comments, and will read and accept whatever written submissions you may wish to provide and bring your comments back to Secretary of Housing, Livable Communities. However, no UHLC or staff will be able to answer specific questions related to any of the draft regulation contents or other ADU law related inquiries today. Some final remarks. First and foremost, thank you. Thanks to each of you on behalf of the Healy District Administration, UHLC, Secretary Augustus, and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for participating in the regulation process of these ADU regulations. The public comment period is integral to the establishment of effective regulations. Further revisions following this hearing, UHLC will take the comments we have gathered in this process back to Secretary Augustus. After considering them, UHLC will make any further revisions to these draft regulations as appropriate. And in regards to publishing final version of the regulations, UHLC intends to publish the final version of the regulations into the Massachusetts Register, where it will be promulgated and become effective prior to the full effective date of the ADU law, which is February 2nd, 2025. With that, We're going to open our public comment process. Our first comment would come from Ron Morgan, and that is in person. Ron Morgan in the room? All right. We'll call Ron again later. Kathleen Capuccio? Also in person? Okay. We'll call them again later. Peter Clark. Right up. Peter, as I mentioned, we have a 3-minute timer. I'll be timing it, and we'll let you know we're coming close to 30 seconds, 45 seconds before.
Thank you. Good morning. For the record, my name is Peter Clark. I have an office address of 300 North Main Street, Suite 102, Mansfield, Massachusetts. My testimony comes from my experience wearing 2 different hats. First, I've been an attorney here in the Commonwealth for over 25 years, focused on real estate, construction matters, and elder law, where I deal with a large number of clients needing ADUs. Second, I've been a licensed construction supervisor or general contractor here in the Commonwealth for 35 years, where I've built residential homes, small condominiums, and done handicapped renovations. The 3 major points that I'd like to cover. First, I'd like to express my objection to one of the definitions in 760 CMR 71.02, and that's the definition of the modular dwelling unit. And I would ask that the HLC strike the last sentence of that definition defining manufactured homes. And having just the opposite effect, I would actually suggest that manufactured homes be added to 71.033 after number 7, so that the prohibition against using a manufactured home as an ADU would be an unreasonable restriction. A manufactured home is an ideal way to create an ADU. Manufactured homes do not have the same negative connotation as units in your grandmother's old-fashioned trailer park. They are high-quality units. In my area, there's south of Boston, there's Tippecanoe Estates in Taunton, there's Oak Point in Middleborough. There are numerous projects where manufactured homes could be done. From a construction standpoint, manufactured homes are constructed under federal codes with better materials and labor under factory conditions. The insulation and energy efficiency is better. And a manufactured ADU provides for more opportunities from a cost standpoint for elders needing an ADU or temporary housing. If you can visualize a scenario where elderly parents, I'm sorry, say like the children of elderly parents, they could have a manufactured ADU, dropped into their backyard. Parents could live in the house in the ADU, and at some point in time, if they pass away, they go off to a nursing home or whatnot, that ADU could be lifted out of the backyard onto a truck and brought to another family that's in need of an ADU. Manufactured homes are a more reasonable cost, far less expensive than building either stick build or with a modular home. And so again, if one of the goals is to provide for more affordable housing, having a manufactured unit is a way to do that. There are local companies. California already uses manufactured homes for ADU purposes. There are manufacturers in the area, one in Pennsylvania, one just over the border in Sherbrooke, Quebec, that make ADUs from a manufactured home standpoint. Second, and I'm trying to be brief here, but one of the things that the regulations I think are silent on and needs to be added deals with ownership and financing and also rental of ADUs. It seems to be completely silent in the regulations. While the idea of an ADU is that it's accessory to, and it is accessory to the primary residence. I would encourage you to consider that it be used as a 2-unit, allowed to be a 2-unit condominium.
I have to ask you just to wrap up that is your final sentence.
Thank you.
Okay.
So, yeah, but if you'd like to just continue that last bit, but yeah.
Okay, it allowed to be used as a 2-unit condominium only because to allow for financing, mortgage financing, reverse mortgage, for a unit to be passed on, inheritance rules to other family members. I would thank the staff for the consideration. And if you have any further questions, feel free to contact me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, great to meet you in person. Thank you so much.
Next person would be remote. Hong Dang. I think they're nodding. They're not yet here. Okay. Next person is Al Norman, virtually as well.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Hello? You can hear me?
We can hear you, Al.
Can you? Okay, thank you. Let me just state at first, I'm here with 2 other people who could get access to this, who had wanted to testify today. So please allow them to follow me. We're all from Greenfield. We all have comments. We did not know we had only 3 minutes because that was not notified. So let me just launch right into it. Section 8 of Chapter 150 states that the use, quote, the use of land or structures for such accessory dwelling units under this paragraph may be subject to reasonable regulations that are not limited to what's listed in your regulations. Nowhere in Section 8 is there any reference to prohibiting standards that would, quote, not be applied to single-family residential dwellings in a single-family district. This standard prohibiting any regulation that is more restrictive than is required is a creation of EOHLC and is not found anywhere as a metric requirement in Section 8 of Chapter 150. The prohibition on standards which are more restrictive than a single-family dwelling is also found throughout the unreasonable regulations section, including environmental regulations, plan review, modular dwelling units, etc. The EOLTC has created an unreasonable regulation that exceeds its legislative mandate from the statute. In addition, by mandating that municipalities can't require owner-occupied and so forth, encourages absentee landlord model from by state fiat. The planning department in our city, the planning department has submitted draft testimony that eliminates state plan reviews from an ADU entirely, so that only a building inspector will review ADU building permits. The draft regulations impose many unmeasurable and arbitrary requirements that are overly broad and vague, resulting in little local control over housing elements like density, design, lot space, and open space. If you look at Chapter 48, Section 3, and childcare facilities, for example, just above there on ADU, you'll see that municipalities have the right to look at bulk and height of structures, determining yard sizes, lot area, setback, open space, gross density. Adjectives in this reg, like reasonable and legitimate and excessive, are subjective and unmeasurable. So we're saying that we have proposed in our city an ordinance that would allow a minimum lot size of half an acre and minimum and open space requirement of 50%. We should be allowed to do that. Other parts of 48 Section 3 allow those as reasonable regulations. These regulations as a whole fail to balance the rights of municipal police powers to adopt the zoning bylaws as an independent constitutional power to protect the health, safety, and welfare of our future inhabitants. We have other issues on definitions, which I won't be allowed to get into because of time restrictions, but we should be able to adopt setback height, lot size, and open space requirements. And we urge you to go back and change these regulations so that they are not more restrictive than what is required in the statute. We don't have single family districts in Greenfield. We have all of our zoning districts are 1, 2, and 3 family. So, this creates a situation where we have no flexibility here. We have no ability to, the state has not looked at all about how to create a moderate opportunity for requirements at the local level. So we're very unhappy with these regulations and hope that you will do your best to make these amendments so we have more local police power under Chapter 40A, Section 1A. And I would like to pass this now to my colleagues, if I may, who otherwise will not be able to be heard. Is that okay?
No, unfortunately, we have to stick to the order of registration. So thank you very much for your comment, Mr.
No, but they
Mr.
can't, you're not, we have two other citizens who are registered but can't get access. They're
We
sitting right
will
there
call
with.
momentarily in order, as we mentioned, Mr. Norman.
So on that, Al, they can call through your mobile phone, like but they have to speak in order which they're, like, if they've registered or not. So you can
They
stay
are registered.
online.
They are registered. They can't access this hearing.
So
What's the phone number? What's the phone number?
No, so if you stay online, we'll
Yeah.
call them in the order in which they're registered to speak. So they'll still have an opportunity to speak. You just need to stay online and wait for their name to be called.
And then when the name is called, what do they do?
You will we'll unmute you, and then that speaker can speak in that order at that point.
So in other words, you're saying you're going to call my number.
If your name is still there, we'll take record of the two names.
If they are having issues with Zoom, our recommendation is that you reach out to the Zoom administrator. You can send a chat to our Zoom administrator, and he can also try to help them figure out a way to access through their end as well.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next
Thank you,
commenter is in person, Alexandra Louder.
Thank you very much. For the record, Alexandra Louder, Community and Economic Development Planner for the town of Tewksbury, and I am speaking in that capacity. Business address 1009 Main Street.
Please slow down. Please start over and slow
Sorry, we have
down.
the,
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Alexandra Louder, Community and Economic Development Planner for the town of Tewksbury, speaking in that capacity. Business address 1009 Main Street, Tewksbury, Massachusetts 01876. Thank you for inviting us to speak here today. I have worked with the building department, fire department, assessing, and DPW and engineering to generate my comments for today. I also attended a meeting of the Massachusetts Building Commissioners, and I provided some commentary there to an EOHLC staff person who was there, but I'll reiterate them here today. First, for detached ADUs, we're wondering if municipalities will be able to require deed restrictions to prevent the expansion beyond the 900 square feet or less than, whichever is higher, which would thereby nullify the protected ADU use. And that comes from really the building commissioners, the zoning enforcement officers' inability to monitor that for compliance and creating the expectation that folks may have built a protected ADU and then it may have become unprotected. Another comment would be wondering if the ADUs are allowed for all structures in single-family residential districts, which allow single-family dwellings, or are only single-family dwellings in the single-family allowed districts, those that are permitted to have these protected use ADUs. It presents a complication if two-family or multifamily buildings in those districts are allowed ADUs, particularly attached, as multifamily buildings have different building and fire code requirements. And I do want to point to the reasonable dimensional regulation mentioned in the regs, where it says single family residential dwelling in a single family district. So it is called out specifically there, but we would like to see clarification throughout the document because that's coming up a lot where folks who have two family buildings in our single family allowed districts are looking to have more. I will speed up. Looking to see what would be considered a pre-existing non-conforming in this context. Is it all residential structures normally allowed in the single family dwelling district that don't meet dimensional requirements, or is it those dwellings in any district such as industrial? I would also like to provide a bit of a commentary to the first speaker's comments about condominiumization of these. Individual ownership could present some complications related to water and sewer and other utility billings. So just want to have that as a part of the consideration. Let's see. Oh, and if single family dwelling exists in a non-single family district, is it appropriate to allow the protected use ADU by special permit to expand a pre-existing non-conforming use, or is it simply not allowed? Our community does not allow use variances. So wondering what the position would be on that. And finally, looking for a distinction between the protected versus non-protected use ADUs when it comes to ADUs being multiple on the same property. And actually, no, really lastly, the regulations cite that no more restrictive than those for single family homes. I would suggest if the intention is to include detached ADUs in there, maybe adding and accessory structures thereof. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Thank you.
Actually, going back,
Could you please ask the speakers to slow down so I can get a clean record? That would be helpful. Thank you.
I can do it 3 minutes. Just saying.
I do want to make note that folks do want to submit additional comments. That is certainly an option. So if there are some key items that you really would like to highlight to us today, live here doing the oral comments, you are still welcome to submit any further additional comments remotely that you were not able to cover today as well. We're more than glad to receive it.
Mr. Clark, you have you wrote out your comments, I noticed. Feel free to submit them.
Okay.
So if you did not.
Submit them by uploading them online.
Public-
Yes.
Okay.
The public comment is still open until essentially the next.
Yeah, correct. Awesome. Well, the next person is Andrew Port, who's virtually, I don't think they're in the room. Okay. Next is Richard Lang, virtually as well. Yeah. Richard, I see you're unmuted. Go ahead. Richard, I see there's a Richard Lang in the chat. Try saying something.
So Richard, the unmute is down to the left of the screen.
Doesn't have a mute on.
There's another mute on.
You just can't hear him.
Okay, so we'll ask staff to unmute you.
Richard, you are unmuted on Zoom. If for some reason you cannot speak right now, we can certainly call on you again to see, or you can try to.
It looks like 2 people used.
Oh yeah, it does look like that.
Yeah.
There are 2 Richard Langs right now.
Coming up on me.
Oh, they're in the same room.
I think it's it's in the other room, Richard, that the microphone is live. Oh, there we go. Hello.
Okay.
Yes, we need to unmute the other one.
We need to unmute the other Richard Lang.
Yes, thank you very much.
I can hear you.
Good. I am a resident of Waltham, and in the past, I have tried to regularize an ADU in my basement, and despite 5 attendances at the Zoning Board of Appeal, thousands of dollars in legal fees, I failed to regularize it because the city of Waltham is dead against any ADUs being built. In the last 20 years, only 3 ADU permits have been issued. I do want to thank the staff who put together the webinars and the information that was put out. They were very good and very useful. But here in Waltham, the city department, the legal department, has already moved to post regulations that deter the production of ADUs. Now, what they are doing, and it's a guide for you the staff to revise the regulations to take account of these attitudes. The first thing they have done is required a minimum size of 600 square feet while retaining the 50% area. Now, most modular and pre-built ADUs are less than 600 square feet and are far more affordable. Many houses in Waltham are less than 1,200 square feet, so they would be precluded from having this ADU. So what is needed is that this should be required. There should be no minimum. The second, they are saying that ADUs are not subject to setbacks for other accessory dwellings. This precludes adding an ADU on the top of a garage, for example. and is clearly in breach of the regulation that's already been quoted, that any design standards that would not be applied to a second family residence. So it's very important to address that. The third is the requirement here in Waltham. They are requiring a separate utility connection. Now, while this may be reasonable for a new build detached ADU, it's completely unreasonable for an internal ADU. There should be a requirement that separate meetings may be required, not must be. And any regulation that requires must have a separate ADU should clearly be unreasonable. They also suggest that no ADU should be more than 1 story. This again is in breach of the building standards for a primary residence, because in Waltham 2.5 stories is the design standard. The second ADU, the permit, where a permit is required, they have a regulation that this building should be compatible with the principal dwelling and surrounding neighbors. This is clearly a subjective standard that can be used to prevent any ADUs being constructed in this thing.
Richard, give me a final comment, please.
Yes, there's one more requirement, that the ADU should be located in the rear yard area and be not more than 25% of the rear yard area. This is clearly unreasonable because it would require a rear yard area of 3,600 square feet, and it may make far more sense for the residents to be able to place their ADU at the side or even at the front of their home, depending on the design situation that people are living in. So I want to thank the staff very much for everything that they've done to make these regulations, but there is an opportunity for them to put in a listing of unreasonable regulations.
Thank you, Richard.
And I've written suggesting what those unreasonable regulations should be.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Our next speaker is either in person or remote. That's Donna Chambers. I'm not sure if you're in the room or if you are in the Zoom.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, hi. I just have a very quick question. I am I'm in the process of closing on a 2-family house, and I just started reading about the additional unit, trying to do my part in terms of like just providing shelter for anyone who's interested, actually, to help out a little bit with the shortage. And my question is simple. Is it allowed to have 2 ADUs on a property? I'm actually in the process of buying a 2-family house. We're closing on a 2-family house. And I just started reading about the additional ADUs, and I just wanted to know if it's possible in Boston to have 2 ADUs on one property.
Thank you, Donna. Just for clarity, we are not able to provide answers to any questions here today, but we appreciate the question and comment.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Our next speaker is also virtually. Forgive me if I mispronounce your name. I will do my best not to. Toyosi Sincere.
Yeah, hi. I have two comments, and the first one is just that the regulation doesn't really provide a lot of information around like financing, implications for like mortgage and taxes and things like that. And then the second comment I have is that if it's not required to have like special permits, how do we make sure ADUs are still like standard, like it's not like a safety hazard? So those are the two comments I have. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you. Next speaker is also virtually, Victoria Alfaro.
I won't provide any comments at this time. I just want to listen, if that's okay.
Works. Thank you very much. Next comment is in person. Jesse Kensom Beninoff.
For you guys. So my name is Jesse Kanson-Beninoff. I'm here today on behalf of Abundant Housing Massachusetts. I'll try to be brief because we have written comments that we will submit. We support EOHLC's position that the purpose of these regulations is to encourage the production of ADUs. We all know we have a well-documented housing shortage in Massachusetts, and it's critical that our laws and regulations make it easier to build homes. While there are several important issues to be addressed by these regulations, our comments focus particularly on the dimensional standards and definitions. So given municipalities total deference, giving municipalities total deference on dimensional standards, so long as they are not more restrictive than the base zoning for single-family homes, is not conducive to the regulation's stated goal to encourage the production of accessory dwelling units throughout the Commonwealth. It will only further empower municipalities to use excessive regulation to prevent these homes. To enable increases in ADU development, EOHLC must establish specific dimensional parameters, particularly for setbacks, lot coverage, and minimum lot sizes. We recommend the following dimensional standards for setbacks: prohibiting rear and side yard setbacks of more than 4 feet or the minimum allowed under building code. And I'll point out this is consistent with the AARP's national state ADU law. Minimum lot size, we would like to suggest prohibiting minimum lot size requirements completely for ADUs, and lot coverage, exempt ADUs from lot coverage calculations on all lots. If establishing these standards on all lots is not possible, then these standards should be in place for smaller lots of 10,000 square feet or less. Smaller lots are most susceptible to being overregulated, and they are more likely to exist in places where housing is most needed, urban communities and their surrounding suburbs. In terms of definitions created in the regulations, it is essential that you maintain the following as written in the draft regulations: bus station, principal dwelling, protected use ADU, and single-family residential district. Again, do not deviate, we recommend, from the definitions you have proposed. They give the largest number of property owners possible the ability to build an ADU by right and maximum flexibility in designing them. Furthermore, it is critical that the definition of use and occupancy restriction be amended to explicitly prohibit a municipality from requiring that the occupant of an ADU be a family member of the property owner. I will not go into detail here because of our written comments, but they include issue on non-conforming lots, utility connections, and density restrictions. In closing, I just want to thank EOHLC for providing these robust regulatory framework and for all the work that you as staff have put into this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next comment comes virtually from Farah Kanari.
Hear me? Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Am I able to share my screen to show my examples?
No, screen sharing is not permitted during today's hearing.
Okay, so I am in the town of Chelmsford, and I thank the commission for allowing me to speak. Chelmsford has historically been very anti-ADU. They have only allowed what they call a LAA, limited accessory apartment, and they have promulgated draft regulations or bylaws to update their LAA bylaw, which is decidedly anti-detached ADU. And I would like the state to explicitly prohibit towns like Chelmsford from doing what they're doing. I will cite 3 examples. As I understand it, under state law, towns and cities are allowed to establish reasonable setbacks for ADUs, which are no more restrictive than for single-family units. However, Chelmsford is specifically trying to disallow any ADU in what they call the front yard. So therefore, a ADU that met the reasonable setback standards of a single-family house in the front yard and the primary house being in the backyard would be disallowed by Chelmsford draft bylaw. B, they are attempting to disallow an ADU from having the same height and or bulk restrictions as a single family dwelling and limiting the height and bulk of a protected ADU to no more than what a non-protected ADU is being allowed to exceed. And they are not allowing a protected detached ADU to have its own separate driveway and curb cut, which to me is completely unreasonable. What I would ask the state to very clearly and explicitly promulgate regulations that protected ADUs have greater rights and greater access to municipality, sewer, road, curb cuts, etc., and that they have the same rights as a primary dwelling unit, only that they are limited to 900 square feet or less. And I would hope that the state would explicitly make sure that towns and cities are not able to limit protected dwelling units just because they are detached and quote unquote affect the character of the neighborhood as Chelmsford is attempting to promulgate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Karani, you can submit your examples if you want us to see them through the public comment.
Correct.
Online.
Great. Next person is also virtually Lino Covarrubias. Lino online. Or the next person. Next person will be in person. Panglam.
The speakers already had similar comments to what I asked.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Then next person is Wade Cedar.
I'll be brief as these have been spoken as well, but good morning. My name is Wade Cedar. I'm a licensed builder from Massachusetts, Newburyport. Here's a degree in public policy, and I've been fortunate enough to come from homelessness to home building. So this work has really been the nexus of my life, with the goal being to provide more housing for people in the Commonwealth. Couple of suggestions. Well, first, I'd like to thank you guys in the administration for what I consider to be some of the most important legislature that has taken place in recent years. I travel to hundreds of houses a year, talk to hundreds of clients. There's a lot of interest in this, but I think some of the most important points that you could add to this bill would be to add in pre-existing non-conforming to the protected. There's a number of people who have garages that are detached that don't adhere to the setbacks of today because, as you've seen some of these comments, towns like Greenfield make it impossible for people to want to build ADUs. And I'm sure that there'll be tons of poison pills to come with towns. So I think the state should premeditate that and protect citizens. If we could explicitly allow for utility tie-ins to either be separate or off of primary, if that could be in the legislature. I'm currently building a home right now, so I'm a prime example of this. I bought some land in Newbury. I'd like to house my mother in an ADU, but I'd also like to build a small house for myself to not be wasteful, as I just sold a 3,000 square foot house for 2 people. It would be in my interest to build the house 1,800 square feet so my mother could have 900, but I only want my house to be 1,200. And my mother only gets 600. So removing the 50% rule would benefit, and also establishing setbacks for the ADU. If they were just previous commenter, maybe 4 feet. And I think that's about it. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for sharing your story as well. Coming early.
Thanks. Next comment goes back to virtual, Thomas Benavides.
Hello, thank you for hosting this public hearing. I really appreciate the work you are doing to legalize ADUs and make sure that they are allowed in cities across the Commonwealth. I am from Waltham, Massachusetts, as a former commenter was. And as mentioned, a big concern is that the base zoning of the principal dwellings do not reflect our communities as they currently exist. The vast majority of existing homes in Waltham are on non-conforming lots. A great example is there's a single family neighborhood, Cedarwood, which was divided up and sold and developed back in the 1950s as lots from 5,000 to 9,000 square feet. But today, the zoning minimum lot size is 10,000 square feet. And the law department in Waltham has already expressed that they believe that this means ADUs would be disallowed in all of these neighborhoods because they are non-conforming. So the big concern is that for so many cities, and especially in Waltham, our zoning code does not represent the neighborhoods as they currently exist. And if we want to actually legalize ADUs and not have them immediately be nullified by local zoning, the ADUs have to be protected on the merits of an objective dimensional standards. It can't be relative to the zoning for the principal dwelling, because the zoning for the principal dwelling, more often than not, for the vast majority of homes in Waltham, is non-conforming, and thus, under the current language, at least by the interpretation of Waltham's law department, would be not allowed to produce ADUs. The second concern is that when taking into consideration the current protections that you have in your draft regulations, Waltham, with their draft ADU zoning ordinance, already plans to flop many of them. As was mentioned by Richard earlier, they plan on establishing a 600 square foot minimum for ADUs, despite the fact that this exceeds state building codes. They expect to require separate metering for water utilities for ADUs, despite the fact that this exceeds state standards. Both of these already violate the draft guidelines. Also, a one-story height minimum or a one-story height maximum for ADUs, despite the fact that that is more restrictive than the principal dwelling. These are all things where city is, flaunting state regulations, and no matter what regulations you produce by February 2nd, cities and towns are going to be flaunting your regulations. So I think a very important thing to include is a built-in way for y'all to monitor what cities are passing and making sure that they are actually complying with state laws. That way, homeowners and ADU builders aren't burdened with the expectation of having to sue town by town, ADU by ADU, in order to build what should already be protected use for them. I would also like to voice my support. I really appreciate people earlier mentioning the protecting the ability to condofy ADUs. I think that would allow a lot more flexibility in who is able to build ADUs and also who is able to finance it if they're able to build and sell, rather than the expectation to have to slowly recoup those funds or slowly or take out a long-term loan. And I think you're about saying my time's up. So thank you so much for this
30
time.
seconds. Good, thank you.
Tom.
Next speaker is also virtually Tom Nicoleno, or I'm sorry, Tom Nicanello. Not present, okay. And we'll go to Christine Rasmussen. Christine, not online.
Hello, I'm sorry. Christine Rasmussen, and I'm from Western Massachusetts, but have spent 30 years on the North Shore in Gloucester involved with their planning and zoning. And the one issue that I would like to make, and I'm going to submit written comments, but BRPC, our Regional Planning Commission, has raised the issue that, and I think it's very evident here today, that towns like Greenfield and those more rural communities are going to have more difficulty in being able to comply with these regulations within the existing zoning framework that has been in place for years. And yes, we need more density, and there are opportunities to do that. But I think it would be interesting if the regulations were divided so that areas like Berkshire County, perhaps the Greenfield area, where it feels more rural and people have different perceptions of what they want their town to look like, would benefit from being able to support the ADU concept without feeling like they're giving up their community character, which is very important out here in the Berkshires. So thank you. I will submit comments.
Thank you very much. Next person is also virtually Afroz Khan.
Hi, good morning. Well, thank you for the opportunity to provide public comment. My name is Afroz Khan, and I am a city councilor in Newburyport. I am speaking as a resident and a community member. Our city is one of those communities that had very antiquated policies, I would say, in the guise of in-law apartments. And we, and myself personally, really welcome the opportunity to allow a much needed policy reform around the acceptance of accessory dwelling units for many beneficial reasons that we're all aware of. Newburyport will actually have its first reading of a revised ordinance to really update our antiquated policies. And as one of the sponsors of the change, I have been closely awaiting the state's guidance on these regulations. So based on my efforts in adopting a positive outcome for our community through the adoption of sound policies for ADUs, I have heard through the public meetings the strong desire for ADUs in our community, yet also the need to balance their integration with thoughtful policies. So as someone who supports the by right adoption of ADUs, my comments today are intended to bring success to what the state is trying to accomplish here. So in general, I think it's important to recognize that broad zoning policies need to be balanced with contextual circumstances based on the locality. So the two specific areas of my comments are around the definitions for bus station as it applies to the parking waiver, as well as the defined by right applicability to broadly address principal dwelling as opposed to single family dwelling units. So to talk about the bus station, for the expansion of the definition of bus station to include the entire bus route for areas that have flag stop routes is something that to me is a broad brush policy. Newburyport is not a rural community. We do have a MEVA transit, the Merrimack Valley Transit, that comes on a flag stop basis. We also have the MBTA end of the line here in Newburyport. So for our policy adoption, the parking waiver around the MBTA commuter station made a lot of sense. However, the flag stop nature of our MEVA bus route would basically encompass 80% of our most densely populated areas of our city that would then really allow no parking to be required for ADUs. The reason I'm bringing this up is we want the integration to be thoughtful and to be in a way that it is an accepted change in housing alternatives in our city. Finally, my other point is on the definition of principal dwelling. I would ask that we really consider single family dwelling lots as opposed to allowing multifamily or two family to have ADUs, but let that be on a locality basis to determine. And that is the bulk of my comments, and thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We've been asked to just notify folks a little in advance who's coming up, so I will actually say the next 5 names moving forward so that folks can kind of know who's coming up next. We will have Alex Train, Amy Quessel, John Idman, Brandon Weeks, and Siobhan Smith. Those are the next folks that I'll be calling. So Alex Train, I believe he's not online yet. Then in person will be Amy Quessel.
Morning. So thank you. My name is Amy Quessel. I am an attorney at KP Law. KP Law represents numerous cities and towns throughout the Commonwealth. First, I wanted to thank EOHLC for the work that was put in on these draft regulations. It was significant. We're pleased to submit comments. We have extensive written comments. Since I only have 3 minutes, I'm just going to do some highlights. First, in the draft regulations, there are 5 references to enacting guidelines. And the statute states that that HLC has the authority to enact guidelines or regulations. HLC has decided to enact regulations. Furthermore, any guidelines have to be limited to, they should be properly promulgated regulations, because guidelines can only do gap filling and clarify ambiguities. Well, since the regulations haven't even been finalized, there's no need for gap filling and ambiguity, clearing up ambiguities. So I think all of the references to guidelines, there's 5, should be stricken. With regard to the definition of principal dwelling, it says that the proposed definition states in part that it contains at least 1 dwelling unit and is located on the same lot as the protected ADU. That implies that a principal dwelling can be a 2-family or a multifamily structure. Since the legislature specifically referred to a single-family zoning district, it appears that the legislature intended that ADUs would be associated with single-family dwellings. So we suggest limiting the principal dwelling to a single-family dwelling. The definition of a single-family residential zoning district, in there it states that where single-family residential dwellings are allowed as of right by special permit, variance, waiver, or other zoning relief or discretionary zoning approval. That greatly expands the definition of single-family residential dwelling, in my opinion, well over what the legislature intended. For a municipality that allows for use variances, that effectively means that a protected ADU can be allowed in the entire city or town, including commercial or industrial zoning districts. And that, I think, contradicts the Affordable Homes Act. And then finally, since I have 30 seconds left, there is a significant concern over non-conforming structures. The use, we understand the use is allowed. It's an allowed use. However, there's a difference between an allowed use or a non-conforming use or a conforming use and a structure. If you have a non-conforming structure, that is regulated by General Laws, Chapter 40A, Section 6, and therefore a Section 6 finding should be required. Therefore, language requiring discretionary approval should be removed from the regulations, the draft regulations. And again, thank you. We do have a lot more extensive comments that we will submit.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.
Next is back virtually, John Idman.
Hi, thank you. This is John Idman. I'm the town planner with the town of Brewster. Summarizing written comments that we have submitted is the town of Brewster that I submitted along with town administration and other community planning and land use management offices in the town, such as building, housing, and our health department. I want to express first my sympathy for HLC. I think to some degree, HLC was saddled with, I think, some of the problems that were created in the legislation that the legislature created. And clearly, HLC can't undo some of those issues with the regulations. However, we hope that the regulations would simplify and clarify rather than create new complications and complexity. And unfortunately, I think with the state of the regulations, additional complexity and complication is created. I also want to maybe express things in a different tenor than some of the comments I've heard earlier. I want to advocate for towns like Brewster and other towns on Cape Cod that have actually been more liberal with ADUs. And I think we're a little bit ahead of the curve than the state has with ADUs. Brewster was, I think, the first town in Cape Cod that adopted a true ADU bylaw in 2018 and amended it in 2023 to be more liberal in terms of size. So without reference to a main residence, we allow 1,000 square feet for the floor area of the ADU. We're fearful in Brewster that we will actually have to walk that back to what's provided for under the legislation and regulations, for fear that we will have to have a second ADU on the property that is the protected ADU, because apparently the ones allowed under Brewster situation will not be considered protected use ADU because it's too large. So I think that's unfortunate, because that cuts against one of the primary purposes of the legislation and regulations, which is to incentivize housing production. You know, I don't think ADUs can solve the Commonwealth or any towns all their needs and desires in terms of production. This was supposed to be one small way to do it. So some of the provisions in the regulations, I think, shoot too high for production, where ADUs should just be one means to do that, but not the principal or only way to do that. I'll leave my comments at that. I mean, I think HLC has largely done a good job with the regulations, but I think should look to walk back some of the complexity is done and stay within the general understanding of what most people have for ADUs, that ADUs are accessory dwellings to single family dwellings. And I think that is something certainly on Cape Cod and Brewster, people have been able to live with those sort of modest assumptions. And there are other things we can do as towns and as the Commonwealth to increase our housing production, in addition to using ADUs as a tool. Thank you for allowing me to comment and accepting my written comments.
Thank you, John. Well, the next two folks are not online, Brandon Weeks and Siobhan Smith. Okay. So the next folks would be Daniel McCarthy, Chris Smith, Al Norman, Courtney Brunson, and Mitchell Speet. Some in person, some remotely. Virtually first, Daniel McCarthy. Not online. Okay. In person, Chris Smith.
Morning, for the record, Christopher Smith, resident business owner of Methuen, Massachusetts. I'll be brief. I would like there to be a proposal for pre-existing non-conforming buildings. I have a structure being rebuilt on my property that includes a 3/4 bath, approved before the law was signed. I would like to make it a legal protected ADU by adding a kitchenette. My local inspector is denying my request to add a kitchen sink, as it changes the use of the structure, thus making me adhere to local setbacks. Also, as an established builder in Massachusetts, I'm starting a business of building ADUs, and I'm looking for a resource I can speak with when I receive pushback from local inspectors. Also, we need a tool put in place for financing, and using an established entity like MassSave may help with finding more convenient loaning opportunities for people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks.
I believe Al Norman spoke already once. So we have a second registration for Al Norman, I'm just realizing. Okay. In person, Courtney Brunson. Oh, she just stepped outside, possibly. There we are.
Great timing. Thank you very much. Multitasking is the name of the game for everyone in this room. Good morning to you all and everyone in this room. My name is Courtney Brunson, and I'm here speaking as the director of the Racial Wealth Gap Partnership. For those who aren't aware, the Boston Foundation convened the Racial Wealth Gap Partnership in 2022 as a network of cross-sector community leaders who identified solutions, program interventions, and research and communications to create and preserve wealth in underserved, underrepresented, and historically marginalized communities through homeownership. Recently, we launched our down payment assistance program which aims to provide 25 million in funding to create, build, and scale homeownership programs in the greater Boston region. Last fall, our first grantee was the Massachusetts Housing Partnership, their One Plus program, a down payment assistance program that includes a low interest affordable mortgage product and no private insurance. We directly fundraised 7 million in total funding and catalyzed an addition from 4 million from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to launch the program. We were heartened by the passage of the Affordable Homes Act, and I'm here in front of you today to express our support for some of the draft regulations and put forward our specific recommendations. The first of which is regarding prohibited and unreasonable regulation prohibitions. We completely support the prohibitions that were outlined, but we think that it is critical that they be developed and released to inform the municipalities of what should be done beyond what is currently outlined in statute. For example, including guidance for design standards and dimension standards in historical districts would be valuable. And while we strongly support the HLC team's promulgation of regulations, we think it's important to note that ADUs are going to play a critical role in wealth building for existing homeowners, including by increasing their property value and allowing them to build wealth by providing a stream of income to help cover expenses and build up savings. The second of which is on data collection and reporting requirements. We strongly support the proposed rules that require municipalities to submit an annual report of collected data. However, we believe there are still multiple pieces of information that should be included beyond what is currently outlined. The first of which is municipal restrictions. The state should ask for and aggregate the number and type of municipal restrictions being imposed to have a full understanding of the current limitations on ADU development. The second of which is denial explanations. While the proposed rules currently ask municipalities to list the total number of ADU applications, the inability to understand why the denials were made undermines both the office's understanding of municipal decision-making and enforcement capabilities. Therefore, they should develop general categories that municipalities can list for each of those ADU denials. Last of which, we think it's important for the team to not just require that municipalities list the general areas of these ADUs, but also list the census geographic areas of all information being provided. We think this will add a granular level of information that provides insight into the specific racial, ethnic, and economic neighborhood makeup for those who are successfully and unsuccessfully creating ADUs. Lastly, they should make sure that these reports are released to the public. Public release allows citizens and stakeholders alike to review and understand their cities and towns' implementation of the new zoning law. We recognize this is going to be a burden to municipal staff and their resources, so we also ask that they provide technical assistance to individuals in need of assistance, which we know that you already do. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I think the next two folks are the folks that were struggling to access the Zoom earlier. Also registered under the same, so I'm not sure if they're together right now. Mitchell Speak and Jean-Marie Jackson. Are they able to register and log in? Jack, do you know? Mitchell or Mitch and Joan Marie.
Hey, well,
Okay.
it's Al
Perfect.
Mormon. Is he still on the chat?
Yeah, so I think Al, if they're not there, we'll call them back again. Okay. All right, the next five folks we have Ali DiMatteo, Jennifer Ray, Matt Noyes, James Burke, and Annette Lewis. Again, back to back in person and hybrid. Ali DiMatteo.
I have a panel with Gloria. Okay, Gloria Ford, come up. And I believe Mandy Jo Henneke will be on.
Okay. Remotely. So who's
Yes.
who's remotely right now?
Mandy Jo Henneke.
Manny Joe. Okay.
Thank
Jack,
you.
if you could open them up as well for them to be part of the panel together.
Thank you so much for accommodating us. I appreciate it. I'm Ali DiMatteo. I'm a legislative analyst.
No,
with the
hold on. You can't speak with someone in line. There's an echo.
Yeah, somehow I have an echo.
Just 1 second, yeah, we'll restart.
If the speaker could start and state your name and spell it, and then we can move on. Thank you.
There you go.
Sure, no problem. I'm Ally DiMatteo. I'm a legislative analyst with the Massachusetts Municipal Association. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify before you today on behalf of cities and towns regarding these draft regulations on protected use accessory dwelling units. I'm joined today virtually, as I said, by Amherst Councilor Mandy Jo Haneke, and in person by Gloria McPherson, Housing and Sustainability Director for the Town of Chatham. They're both going to provide more in-depth insight into how these draft regulations might affect their communities, but I wanted to give you a broader overview of MMA members' thoughts and concerns about these draft regulations. So first, the MMA shares EOHLC's goals in producing more housing, and we were and continue to be excited about the passage of the Affordable Homes Act. I see all these wonderful wires. We feel these regulations can be improved to provide a little more clarity and guidance on ADUs, and we know local officials are eager to partner with you all on this issue. We will be submitting a formal comment letter today, and I obviously don't have time to get into all the details, but I do want to quickly highlight a few key points. Broadly, there's a question about whether the regulations go too far beyond their statutory authorization in limiting some reasonable municipal restrictions. For example, allowing municipalities necessary flexibility in restricting short-term rentals is essential in promoting and protecting true year-round housing for residents. I know Gloria is going to discuss the need for longer-term periods, particularly in seasonal communities like on the Cape, but there are other communities who want and need year-round housing and have concerns about not being able to restrict their short-term rentals beyond 1 month. We also have some concerns about utility and environmental regulations. This is especially important in areas where there are a number of non-conforming buildings, which I know folks have talked about, and areas with environmental overlays. Not all single-family homes are in single-family districts, and the reverse is also true. Not all buildings in single-family zone districts are single-family homes. Regulations that can interact with non-conforming structures, varied lots, and non-standard components are really essential here. Issues like size, setbacks, and siting are also important to work out clearly to ensure that accessory dwelling units are indeed accessory dwelling units. So thank you for your time and work on these regulations. I know it was not easy. We look forward to working with you. And Gloria?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So my comments will be focused on the ADU draft regulations as they relate to short-term rentals. As written in section 71.01 statement of purpose, the goal of the ADU law is, quote, increasing the production of housing to address statewide, local, and individual housing needs for households of all income levels and all stages of life, as well as empowering property owners to add much needed housing stock to address the Commonwealth's housing needs. These statements of purpose are really describing what can further be qualified as year-round housing. Individuals and households in Massachusetts need stable year-round housing where they can put down roots in communities. Short-term rentals do not meet this need, and I'm concerned that there aren't enough guardrails in the ADU draft regulations to prevent the development of ADUs that are used solely as short-term rentals. This may not be an issue everywhere, but on the Cape and Islands, the Berkshires, other rural resort communities, and tourism destinations, short-term rentals have hollowed out our communities by reducing available rental stock and causing an increase in both the cost of ownership and rental dwelling units. It's also made it really difficult to develop ADUs because the return on investment for short-term rentals is several times shorter than if you were to rent it year-round. The definition in the short-term rentals in the draft regulations refers to Mass General Law Section 64G, Chapter 64G, Section 1, which does not define a time period for short-term. And of course, other sections in the Mass General Laws and the Code of Mass Regulations cite time periods of both 31 days and 90 days as the short-term rental term. I think it would be helpful to Cape communities and other communities I mentioned earlier if ADU regulations were to define a rental term for short-term rentals that's as long as possible in order to encourage year-round or close to year-round occupancy. For instance, a rental term of 31 days would never work for the Cape. And it would just encourage the production of ADUs to be used as short-term rentals. Even a term of 90 days in our circumstance wouldn't work, and in fact would just encourage longer season-long rentals, which there's a strong market for. I ask that short-term rentals are not going to be prohibited through the ADU regulations, that municipalities be given the flexibility to define what a short-term rental is for their community, specifically as it relates to the ADU law. Regarding year-round occupancy, Section 71032 prohibited regulations says that a municipality shall not subject ADUs to a use and occupancy restriction. I have a question about whether this applies to short-term rental use. Would this also prohibit year-round occupancy restrictions on an ADU? I would ask that the regulations be clarified and that municipalities be given the flexibility to restrict or prohibit the use of ADUs as short-term rentals, and also to allow year-round occupancy restrictions on ADUs. Further, Section 7102 definitions of ADU says, quote, no municipality shall unreasonably restrict the creation or rental of an ADU that is not a short-term rental. This seems to imply that there's more flexibility in regulating an ADU if it's being created as a short-term rental, but it would be impossible to know what the ultimate intention is of someone as they apply for a building permit for an ADU. And then also the draft regulations doesn't really parse out a difference in how you could potentially restrict a short-term rental ADU versus a regular one. And just to wrap up, a couple of things not related to short-term rentals. I also like the idea of enabling municipalities to allow towns to adopt bylaws that would allow the separate conveyance of the unit, the ADU unit, and the principal residence. I think this would actually encourage the construction of building ADUs because the return on investment would be greater potentially and also more immediate. And also that would only work if they were restricted for year-round occupancy. Otherwise, people would just be creating units that could be, sold as seasonal homes. And then a corollary to this would be that some towns might want to require a recorded restriction that includes a prohibition on the sale of the ADU separately from the sale of the single-family house. I think that both of these could be incorporated in the regulations to give municipalities maximum flexibility to create the type of housing they need. And thank you.
Thank you. Mandy?
Thank you. And as it said, my name is Mandy Jo Haneke, and I'm a town councilor in the city known as the town of Amherst, and I thank you for allowing me to testify virtually. These regulations, as everyone has said, are essential to promoting the creation of ADUs throughout the Commonwealth. In 2021, Amherst changed its zoning bylaws to permit most owner-occupied ADUs by right. These changes were overwhelmingly supported because of the conditions that we tailored to Amherst's status as a college town and have actually proven successful in creating ADUs. One of these conditions that has made the bylaw successful is that the town considers some lots with ADUs to be closer in use to duplexes than single-family homes. With this in mind, we impose conditions on lots with ADUs that closely match conditions imposed on duplexes. For example, it is reasonable in our college town to require oversight by a professional management company of a lot with an ADU where neither the principal dwelling nor the ADU will have owner occupants, just like we require for non-owner occupied duplexes. However, the current draft regulations would deem this condition unreasonable because rented single-family homes only need a management plan, not oversight by a professional management company. So I ask that you declare conditions imposed on protected use ADUs reasonable if they are generally imposed on similarly situated two-family dwellings also. Two other conditions that have made Amherst's ADU by right bylaw successful are its clarity regarding multiple ADUs on a lot and its requirement that the principal dwelling be a single-family home. The draft regulations create uncertainty on whether a protected use ADU can exist on a lot that also has a non-protected use ADU on it, because right now they define protected use ADU as having, quote, no other ADU located on said lot. Please revise the regulations to be clear on whether a protected use ADU can be built on a lot that already has an ADU, and whether building a second ADU on a lot that has a protected use ADU nullifies the protected use status of the first ADU on the lot. The draft regulations also limit community flexibility by requiring special permits for multiple ADUs on a parcel, which prohibits towns from using site plan review for these items. Communities should be given a choice on how and whether to permit multiple ADUs on a single lot. So I ask that you revise the regulations to permit, but not mandate, a special permit for multiple ADUs on a lot, so that if municipals wish, they could use the site plan review process. Finally, it appears that the draft regulations permit protected use ADUs on lots that have multiple principal dwellings. You've heard this one before in today's testimony. ADUs are intended to add infill density to single-family home neighborhoods, not to be constructed on lots that already have multiple principal dwelling units. So I ask that you limit protected use ADUs to lots that have only one single family residential dwelling on them. So thank you for your continued support of all Massachusetts municipalities and your attention to our needs and our housing needs and your consideration of these requests for changes.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Jennifer Raitt is not online yet. Okay. All right. The next five folks I already have read up. So Matt Noyes.
Good morning. My name is Matt Noyes. I'm Director of Public Policy for CHAPA, the Citizens Housing and Planning Association. The regulations we're here discussing, proposed by EOHLC, are really important and very positive. They'll go a long way toward making ADUs a valuable tool to help Massachusetts address its housing needs. The draft regulations strike the right balance between setting statewide rules to allow development of ADUs, while also allowing municipalities to shape local bylaws to reflect local context. In looking at the regulations before us, CHAPA requests that EOHLC preserve the following elements that were proposed. First, a definition of a protected use ADUs that includes the full range of ADUs, detached, interior upper, interior lower, etc. Definitions of single-family residential zoning units and of principal structures that adhere to the spirit of the law to encourage the production of ADUs. The establishment of design standards that provide objective clarity to aid the ADU construction process. And guidance to municipalities that discourages the imposition of regulations, including site plan review and impact analyses that go beyond those that would be applied to single-family homes. CHAPA further asks EOHLC to consider the following issues. First, non-conforming lots. For non-conforming lots, CHAPA recommends that ADUs follow the setback of existing property, the existing primary structure or other existing accessory structures on a property. Alternatively, CHAPA supports EOHLC aligning with AARP's recommendations and setting a standard of 4 feet for front and rear setbacks as the standard for non-conforming lots. For utility connections, CHAPA recommends that municipalities be prohibited from requiring separate utility hookups for an ADU where hookups for the primary residence are available. Further, local septic regulations should not be a barrier to ADU development and should not exceed state standards. On occupancy restrictions, CHAPA urges EOHLC to consider potential local occupancy limitations that would violate the spirit of the law. EOHLC should make clear that restrictions limiting occupants or tenants of an ADU to familial relations to the primary owner should be prohibited. Full development and construction costs of an ADU may be less than those of a traditional single-family home, but will likely be more than most homeowners can afford without loans or significant financial assistance. CHAPA hopes to work with the EOHLC and other stakeholders to determine the feasibility and structure of a financial assistance program to help eligible homeowners construct ADUs. Additionally, many homeowners who build an ADU on their property and to rent it out will likely be landlords for the first time. EOHLC should develop technical assistance program that encompasses key issues for new landlords, including fair housing. With that, I will stop. We've submitted more detailed written testimony and look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Just want to note that all of our coming registered commenters are all virtually. So if there's anyone in the room that still wishes to make a comment and you've not yet registered, or we just haven't called you, we'll call back on anybody that we called on and wasn't here yet. But if anybody in the room is not registered, you're welcome to register if you're still interested in speaking and you are not yet registered. All right, so James Burke, I think he is not online, correct? Yes, not online. Do you want to call the next slide? Yeah, I'll go to the next slide now. Yeah, so the next 5 that we're calling out now will be all remote. Annette Lewis, Zach McCain, Barbara Cooper, Jeffrey Lacey, and Roger Blott. So Annette Lewis.
Thank you. Annette Lewis, Vice Chair of the Wayland Planning Board. I think it's important that you recognize that towns already have definitions in their comprehensive zoning bylaws, and some of those that you have drafted for basic definitions don't match, for example, what we have in Wayland. Our definition of lot talks about definite external boundaries without any other legal boundaries or lines internal to said external boundaries, excepting easements. That becomes very important for us in enforcing floodplain zoning and aquifer protection zoning, because you can only have a certain percentage of the lot being used for public safety and health reasons. Another example is gross floor area. Your definition includes basements. Ours excludes unfinished basements. And we will wind up having 2 separate definitions in our basic underlying zoning bylaw that contradict each other. And we can't deal with that by February the 1st or 2nd. In addition, with regard to setbacks, we already have provisions for buildings such as an accessory dwelling unit in the rear lot, and there's a 10-foot setback that's already in place, and that works for us and has worked for us. We wouldn't like to have to be at odds with what your regulations are and what our regulations are. With regard to your definitions, the bus station definition, as was mentioned by others, does not work for us. We don't have any currently, any what one would call public transportation. And if you follow the definition that's in the MBTA Communities Act, that works a little better. It doesn't have to be tied to the silver line, but it would be best if it could say that has a passenger platform and other fixed infrastructure serving as a point of embarkation. Routes change over time, and if you already have an accessory dwelling unit or you're just planning on putting one in, you're not going to be accomplishing what you want because the route could change and you might not have any parking spaces any longer that you would need if there was no public transportation. The definition of prohibited regulation is a little overbroad, and I agree that we should have rulemaking for any kinds of additional guidelines. And if you have read the Attorney General versus Milton case that just came down, they make it quite clear that you can't just adopt guidelines. You have to go through an APA process. It also needs to be made clear exactly what zoning districts you're regulating. I think the statute talks about regulation of single-family residential zoning districts. And in your definition of single-family residential zoning district, it greatly expands the statutory intent and to areas that are not just zoned for residential, but to any other zone, even if it currently they wouldn't need actual regulatory approval. We ask that you limit your definitions to what the statute allows.
Thank you, Annette.
Thank you.
Zach McCain, rather. He is online. The next speaker would be Barbara Cooper. Okay, I don't see Annette.
Can we spotlight her?
Barbara Cooper.
Barbara Cooper. Or is just Annette is a live mic?
No, I think that's the remainder of live mic. There you go, live mic's being cut.
Okay, cool.
I don't see Barbara Cooper. Okay. Jeffrey Lacey. Jeffrey Lacey either. And Roger Blood.
Roger's on.
Yeah, the next one, next, yeah.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes, that's great. Well, thanks for holding this hearing and for taking information and comments so broadly from very interested people. And I'm sure mostly, if not all, supporters of ADUs. I'll just give you a very brief self-intro, and then my comments are also very brief, which I've also submitted in writing. I'm a longtime advocate locally in Brookline for ADUs, having first introduced the first ADU zoning article in our town meeting back in 2009. Recently, I co-wrote and co-sponsored for November 2024 town meeting an ADU article expressly intended to bring our zoning in line with our best understanding of the new state statute, and having done that in consultation with our own town council. That article was approved by all the interested local boards and commissions, and then authorized by town meeting by a near unanimous vote of 238 to 1. Beyond serving locally on our local zoning bylaw and housing policy committees, my 50-plus year career in housing and home finance has included as a senior executive for a nationwide mortgage insurance firm and consulting on housing finance and homeownership promotion in 20 countries, including for the World Bank. My brief remarks with that perspective are just a couple of points as follows. And you may have already heard one or both of these. First, the statute and the reg depict an ADU as relative to a principal dwelling. The term principal dwelling is broadly understood in the housing and home finance field to mean a single family dwelling unit and not a multifamily building. So at least we would ask that the two words at least in the proposed regulations in this regard should be deleted from the draft regulation to clarify the definition and intent on this important distinction. That's the first comment. And my second comment is that there is a great difference, obviously, in the intensity of use between a small, vacant, non-conforming shed and a 24/7 occupied ADU. And we think that this justifies that there be a reasonable distinction made between these two, considering abutter impact and minimum setbacks. The regulation should not equate one with the other. A vacant shed, especially near a neighboring lot line and in dense areas especially, should not be seen as equivalent to a fully occupied ADU for the reasons I've stated. And I thank you very much again for hearing me and for holding this hearing and for all the work you've done to promote ADUs to meet a huge housing need statewide and nationally. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger.
Thanks, Roger.
The next 5 folks who will be called to speak are Richard Benka, Amy Poretsky, Anthony Marino, Kate Fletcher, and Maggie Oldfield. So Richard Benka.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your efforts and for holding this hearing. I'm Richard Benka. I'm a resident of Brookline. I'm a former select board member, and I've been chair of various committees that over the years have revised and updated Brookline zoning bylaw. I'm one of the drafters, along with the chair of the town's Housing Advisory Board, whom you just heard from, the Office of Town Council, and representatives of the town's Planning and Community Development Department of a significant liberalization of the zoning bylaw that town meeting passed in November 2024. I'm sorry, of the town's bylaw that town meeting passed in November 2024 to comply with and indeed exceed the requirements of the Affordable Homes Act. I'll be filing more complete written comments, but I want to highlight just 2 points. First, extending the mandate for ADUs beyond lots containing only single-family dwellings to lots containing 2-family, 3-family, and multifamily buildings exceeds the authority granted by the Affordable Homes Act and requires modification of the draft regulations. Secondly, proposals that you've heard today to expand the draft regulations, for example, to impose statewide 4-foot setbacks, or to eliminate minimum lot size requirements, or to mandate ADUs on non-conforming lots and in non-conforming structures without any limitation or control, would displace local zoning authority and likewise exceed the authority granted by the Affordable Homes Act. I'll be filing, as I said, more complete written comments and an explanation for these points. But again, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Next is Amy Paretsky.
Hey, actually, my name is Amy Paretsky, and I'm from the town of Northborough, and I didn't plan on speaking today. I just wanted to listen to all the other comments. We are submitting some comments in writing, but I wasn't planning on speaking today.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Anthony Marino.
Thank you. This is Anthony Marino. I am the Winthrop Town Manager, and we have submitted written comments as well, but I also wanted to just highlight a few of those for you today. Thank you for your time. Winthrop obviously is a peninsula coastal community comprising of 1.6 square miles. It's one of the more dense communities already in the Commonwealth. And while we certainly welcome ADUs to the town, we certainly want to stress that there needs to be a little more restrictions allowed. We've highlighted those in our comments, but one of the primary issues is parking. I can't stress it enough. As the Executive Officer of Housing and Livable Communities and Secretary Augustus was well aware, after touring the town, Winthrop has very narrow streets, limited parking, and any sort of additional units that come to town go through strict zoning questions and requirements with regard to parking through our Planning Board and Zoning Board of Appeals. To not address that and to not have some ability in the municipalities to put restrictions on parking would be negligent on the state's part, especially in the more dense communities. We don't have the capabilities to handle it. We already have narrow streets. We have lots that have limited 1 or 2 spots per single family parcels, with many having no option for parking. So to not have that availability to put that restriction in place would certainly hurt and limit Winthrop's ability to be able to comply and do it safely. There's already mentioned by other speakers, but the making sure that we clarify that this is for single family homes, would be crucial. We already have a lot of single 2, 3, 4 families, and to be able to have people come in and try to backdoor and be able to get an ADU would just be an increase from a 2-family to a 3-family or a 3 to a 4 without any sort of site plan review process would be a problem as well. We certainly want to work with the state and have shown that over the past 6 months with regard to MBTA and 3A, but we also want to be able to do it safely. The zoning that's already been done in a town like Winthrop, and certainly needs to be recognized. It's gone on in the last 10 years or so. That's allowed for more growth. The town has already done this without the state's assistance. We have added zoning that's, in the next 10 years, we'll probably create another 150 to 200 units on our own without any help.
Oh, the
So,
1-2 punch.
yeah. So that's where we're at. And I just wanted to thank you for your time.
Thank you. Kate Fletcher.
Hi, good morning, and thank you for hosting this public hearing. My name is Kate Fletcher, and I have served on the Stockbridge Planning Board for 14 years. Stockbridge is a small town in the Berkshires of just under 2,000 population, and I am currently serving as the chair. So I have I have submitted comments online, and I'll just mention that Stockbridge is one of only 3 towns in the Berkshires above the state mandate of 10%, which I understand is currently unenforced. And it's likely higher if you factor in rentals that do not fall under the subsidized housing inventory, but are reasonably priced if those rentals were factored in. My other comment has to do with short-term rentals, and as a small town in a home rule state, Stockbridge has been fortunate in its active and engaged citizenry. Even in these polarized times, we have managed thus far to balance myriad interests and maintain the character of the town. Both home rule and foundational tenets of zoning seem to be a target of this legislation, and yet, and this is speaks to my point, addressing the impact of outside investor-owned short-term rentals, one of the biggest threats to mid-range or missing middle housing, is not part of this mandate. Thank you again, and I'll look forward to hearing more from the Housing and Livable Communities Agency on the progress made with these regulations.
Thank you, Kate. Maggie Oldfield.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, thank you. I just want to say many of us do support ADUs, but many more of us support the concept of local control. We just want the opportunity to create zoning that works for our individual towns, especially in light of the closures of the many hospitals. We should all be concerned about the increase of density without increasing the availability of basic health care for our residents. And I just want to say, in light of the recent HLC, and HLC will file with the Secretary of the Commonwealth a statement estimating the fiscal impact of the proposed regulations. And I am a business owner, and I'm really concerned that housing is taking a precedence over the health of our businesses. And I'm wondering when HLC will be conducting a small business impact analysis, because in this most recent SJC ruling, they have required it. So I am wondering if you're going to reach out to every small business owner in the 350 communities in the Commonwealth. So I'm wondering how you are going to notify us so we can participate in the impact analysis. Thank you.
Thank you. And last person on the registration, but please note, we will go back to folks that we called who were not present in the first pass to give another opportunity for them to be able to speak. Liz Trice.
Hi, my name is Liz Trice. I'm the Policy and Partnerships Director for Backyard ADUs. We are a home construction company that started in Massachusetts, and we've built over 40 ADUs in Massachusetts, and that's the bulk of our business. So that's what we do. We believe in building housing that's attainable, that's not crazy expensive, and we believe that we found a really good way to do it. And we believe that ADUs are pretty much the least expensive, quickest, most efficient form of housing that we can build right now in Massachusetts. And so my comments are mostly around how to make sure that ADUs will in fact be legal to build. First of all, I want to support the other comments that have been made about things like reducing setbacks and allowing different ownership, allowing for conduization, because that's pretty much in many places the only way you're going to get home ownership opportunities in towns. But the thing I want to focus on today is permitting issues. Once the zoning barriers are removed, I'm starting a stopwatch so I can tell how long I'm talking. We're concerned about local regulations, which can add $50,000 or more to each ADU project. If you're building a new home that's going to sell for $700,000, $800,000, $50,000, $50,000 may not seem like a big deal, but to an ADU that you're hoping to build for under $300,000, that can kill the project. And even already, the rents on ADUs, barely cover the cost of building the ADU. So for most people if you're building for family, maybe it's okay if you lose money, but if your goal is to add housing to your community, then you don't want to lose money for the first 5 years. So we want to see local regulations that add cost be reduced, and in the current proposed regulations, it's vague, and we're worried that it's going to end up being in lawsuits for several years, as opposed to just the state could make some specifications now that prevent many years of bumps. So for example, we suggest that the state provide standard details for DPW and site attachments for detached, attached, and internal ADUs. For example, standard water connection details, standard sewer detail drawings, and standard drawings for electrical connections. And really, we suggest that towns be prohibited from requiring anything that wouldn't be required for an addition. Because ADUs, we see ADUs more like an addition. So for example, if a sewer or septic is rated to handle one additional bedroom, then a 1-bedroom ADU should not be required a separate sewer connection or new or expanded septic system. It's just an extra bedroom. If the town requires a stormwater plan, it should only look at the additional building square footage, not require a new plan for the entire site. We had a recent project in Lexington where we were required to dig 6 test pits and create a separate stormwater facility and do a plan for the entire site, which added $40,000 and 3 months to our project. The right thing would only be to look at the new impervious area and presume a standard soil quality. So that's it. We encourage you to get really specific about those DPW details and offer them and require individual towns to use them. And we're happy to be available to provide any details. We'll also provide written comment. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll now go back to the start of the list for folks that we first called on and did not respond. So Ron Morgan. Okay. Kathleen Capuccio. Pong Dang.
Hi, I'm here, Kathleen Capuccio.
Okay, great.
Hi, my name is Kathleen Capuccio. I'm from Winthrop, Massachusetts. And I would just like to echo a couple of statements where people were making about local control. We need to have some local control over these ADUs. Like our town manager, Marino, had mentioned, Winthrop is a very, very dense community already, one of the densest in the Commonwealth. And especially when it comes to parking, we have a real parking issue in our town, and we cannot have further we can't have further restrictions placed upon us by the state to, yes, increase housing, but also to not have any parking for said housing. It's unreasonable, similar to MBTA 3A, one size fits all zoning does not work. The EUHLC is very well aware of that with all the pushback that they received on MBTA 3A. So in towns, we absolutely need to have some local control because all towns and cities in the Commonwealth are very different. And with regard to, a couple of people have spoken about, the cost of ADUs and that they can't be cost prohibitive. And when it comes to local regulations, whether it's public works regulations or what have you, this cannot be a developer's dream just to make money. These ADUs are going to be built in communities. So let's not make this a developer's dream for people just to come in and make money. Local control over how our towns and cities actually live day to day is very important. And the EOHLC needs to be more careful with protecting towns and cities and not just protecting developers. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Hon Dang. They online, check.
Yeah, I'm here. Hon Dang. Yes, good morning, everybody. I'm a contractor slash homeowner, and I'm looking to build an ADU at my house for my mom, Asian place. And I believe I heard this conversation before that, certain cities are requiring separate sewer and separate water. And I heard the previous lady talk about it. Just to let you guys know that, I'm a contractor, a 4-inch drain can do a lot of capacity. That will be more than enough for a lot of housing. A 4-inch drain can literally do 10 bathrooms in one building, a 4-inch drain. So just to let you guys know, if you don't think your drain can handle it, most residential has 4-inch drainage. So that can handle 10 bathrooms and 6 kitchen. Also water line, a 1-inch water line pipe can do the exact same thing again, 9 bathrooms and 6 kitchens in one building. So that's just to let you know the capacity of it. And yes, these are all from engineer drawings that I've done on previous projects. So if the town say that you don't have enough capacity, I really doubt it. Most standard home has 3/4-inch water line coming in and standard 4-inch drain and sewer. Thank you.
Thank you. And report.
Thank you kindly. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thanks. I did not have a chance to put that in a written comment, so I'm just reading from a couple of notes here, a couple of things I thought it was worth commenting on. I very much appreciate, I'm a director of planning and development for the city of Newburyport, so over the years in multiple communities, seeing the local context and definitely appreciating the relationship between the communities, the home rule, and the Commonwealth's objectives, which I support, by the way, as a professional planner, the need to address the affordable housing shortage, particularly the smaller units that are more affordable, but housing in general. In general, a couple of things. I very much appreciate, perhaps more than other planners, I don't know, but the reference to legal standards and case law, essentially, that are in the regulations. I think that's necessary given the limited language in the statute itself, and I think that most of that is very appropriate and sort of is expected from my lens, given the limited case law I'm familiar with, seems to be appropriate to include that in there. So I do appreciate that. I do question whether or not the use of variances where in districts where variances are allowed in the regulations. I question whether that makes any sense, only because variances could essentially happen anywhere, and in our community and many others, use variances are not allowed for the underlying use. So just question whether or not that should be stricken from the regulations as opposed to as right or a special permit, for instance. The bus station routes, I did want to note that I do think it's understandable given the language of the legislature. It seemed to be probably noticeable at the local community level, the more sweeping impact of a bus station being interpreted as the entire bus route, so to speak. So just something to consider there one way or the other. I'm not sure how that gets balanced, but certainly a broader area impacted by that interpretation application than some might have expected. I do think there's a need for, and it's appropriate, especially in a community like Newburyport, to address community character, to have design standards. I do and have commented with our city council on the importance of having uniform treatment to the underlying use and not something I would refer to as sort of disparate treatment. I definitely think that that's important. I think that we have been working well to incorporate appropriate standards and to have, even par on the review of the underlying use versus the ADU. But I do think it's important to allow latitude for those. And it seems that at least you've attempted to allow the latitude for things like that in the regulations and obviously with the statutory language. I very much support, while I recognize the site plan review is referenced in the statute, I do very much support and agree with having those be objective, clear, and unambiguous measurable standards. Things that are not subjective and not discretionary in nature. We did happen to have here locally some debate about during the public comment period on our own ordinance update, whether or not very broad discretionary language could be used as criteria for so-called site plan review. And I definitely, I would say, concur with the Commonwealth that would be more akin to, I think, a discretionary special permit to use language like that. So I do think that it's very important to use clear, unambiguous standards. That would be addressing the root issue, I think, that the legislature and the governor were trying to get to initially, which is a clear and coherent permit path that is not, questionable or unknown to the applicant. I think it's a good practice in general for any constituent of the community to be able to read the zoning, hopefully without the assistance of an attorney, and understand what is expected. And that brings, I think, to another point that we had debated here locally, and I think we're on a good track for ourselves. But the recognition that if you really effectively need to have objective, clear, and unambiguous standards that are not subjective or discretionary in nature, it seems to beg the question, and I think you've highlighted that in your presentations and in your regulations to a degree, seems to beg the question of whether or not it is necessary or therefore appropriate and consistent with the statute to have a volunteer board, so to speak, review under those criteria. And the reason for that, I think, is just summed down to why have something done by 3, 5, or 7 members or volunteers that are rotating, for instance, as much as they're well intended, and we do love working with our volunteer boards, but why subject everybody to all that process and multiple interpretations when really the interpretation of one person who can read the text can do. So I think there are probably limited instances in which things may need to be sent to boards, but I think the underlying criteria themselves for community character, screening for butters and things like that are perhaps more important, given that we don't typically have site plan review for, say, the underlying single family home. The only other 2 things I wanted to comment on were related to I think the definition of principal dwelling. Just 2 thoughts with that. One is, and I think a few others had commented on it, but query or question whether or not the principal dwelling really should be interpreted as limited to the single family dwelling. I had some discussion with our council about this, and our legal counsel had commented to our city council early in the process, but both 40A and the language of the statute here utilize the singular, whereby the ADU is accessory to a principal dwelling unit or the principal dwelling. So the dialogue, I think, or the question I have is that had multiple units been intended, the language might have read accessory to principal dwelling units or principal dwellings. So just a query as to whether or not that principal dwelling is really intended to refer only to single family dwellings as opposed to the other types that might be in those districts. The last thing I had was, I think, still on that same definition, which just a question of whether or not there's what might be considered circular language used in the definition. Principal dwelling is defined as a structure, et cetera, et cetera. And that definition concludes with and is located on the same lot as a protected use ADU. It seems to me that you're in principal dwelling, you're establishing the underlying use of the definition of that. So if someone doesn't have an ADU, there's still a definition for that underlying use you're starting with. I just wonder whether or not you'd want to revise the final phrasing or take out the need to have the ADU on the lot in order to have a principal dwelling unit that you're then having an ADU authorized on that lot. So just a question about maybe wordsmithing that definition.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. I'm going to stop you there. So we went a little bit over limit for you. So thank you so much.
Sorry. Thank you. I'm finished. Thank you very much. Apologies. Yep.
Lino Covarrubias, I think they're still not online. Nope, okay. Micanello, I believe also not online. I know we are right at 12:01. Not a lot of folks that did not sign up in advance. A few folks that signed up in advance, we called on, but we're gonna call them again to give them an opportunity to speak. So I think we're gonna try to just power through. We probably have about 15-20 minutes left. And then we'll probably close it at that point potentially. So let's keep going, just letting everybody know, not time check here, with folks. All right, so no here. Next, Alex Train.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alex Train. I serve as the Chief Operating Officer for La Colaborativa in Chelsea. We're the preeminent Latinx-led nonprofit organization that strives to empower upward economic mobility across the Commonwealth. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share public comments with the committee and to weigh in on these proposed regulations. To preface this, we want to thank EOHLC as well as the Governor Healy administration for producing a really thoughtful set of regulations. We want to commend you on the effort that takes, as well as the competing interests that have to be accounted for. Many of our public comments are touched on throughout the course of today's dialogue, but in particular, we wanted to highlight the minimum or maximum square footage that's allowable in the new regulations and encourage consideration of increasing that to 1,200 square feet to accommodate intergenerational families and larger family units. In dense gateway cities like Chelsea, it's common to have multiple family members living within the same home. And we want to ensure that our seniors can age in place and our families can remain intact. And by increasing the square footage, we hope to be able to accomplish that. Additionally, we strongly encourage consideration of allowing ADUs in basements and attics within existing residential units. This may include, 1 to 4 family buildings, similar to the land use in Chelsea. And we applaud you for digging into some of the more contentious parking requirements. For example, the requirements laid out for rapid transit communities are something that are aligned with the Commonwealth's climate and transportation goals. So we do applaud you for taking that step. And then lastly, as we close everything out, we want to comment on the notion of local control. We would emphatically encourage EOHLC to ensure that there are no opportunities for municipalities to circumvent the implementation of this law. I think with MBTA communities, we saw some very creative language floating about zoning bylaws. So for issues like design review, site plan review, and other mechanisms that could be leveraged to oppose the creation of ADUs, we urge EOHLC to craft language that preemptively addresses this. And the last item would be related to short-term rentals. I think similar to many of the folks who shared public comment today, we would discourage short-term rentals being allowed as a potential use within protected use ADUs. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Brendan Weeks is still not online. Oh. Siobhan Smith. Daniel McCarthy. Okay. Al, we are back to you and the 2 folks that you had with you, Mitchell and Joan, Mitchell Spee and John Jackson. They were just there. Yeah, they were just there.
Do you want to ask Jack to unmute them?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Oh, great, great. Okay. I'll do it again. Jo Marie Jackson, and thank you for this opportunity to offer my testimony. I will be continuing testimony on definitions. I am a homeowner and land use activist from Greenfield. We have submitted our full statement in writing. The design standards defined in the ADU draft regulations should be expanded from exterior design and use of materials to such include issues as minimum lot size and measurement of lot open space. These are issues that are part of the design of an ADU as it fits on a lot. A municipality should have the design control to establish a clear and objective measurement of which lots are too small to add a second dwelling, and a threshold of open space on a lot which must be preserved. These ADU definitions should add the language found in my city's site plan review ordinance, which includes design features which will integrate the proposed development into the existing landscape, maintain neighborhood character, enhance aesthetic assets, and screen objectionable features from neighbors and roadways. Our city has site plan reviews approval guidelines which evaluate the provision of open spaces and protection of historic features and design which does not detract from properties in the area. The definition of dwelling unit should state clearly what the occupant load of a 900 square foot building should be. One or more persons should be specific to how many individuals are permitted to live in an ADU pursuant to the state building code for occupancy. The historic district definition should allow municipalities to determine that neighborhoods with buildings of historic and architecture significance may adopt local regulations regarding design standards for ADU, which maintain historic significance of neighboring properties without requiring designation of a historic district.
30 seconds.
Modular dwelling unit is a trailer which is affixed to a foundation. Is it considered an ADU? Principal dwelling. The words open space as determined by the municipality should be added as a dimensional requirement, in addition to setbacks, bulk, and height requirements. Cities and towns should have the ability to set density open space standards by different zones within their community. Single-family residential zoning district. A two-family home commonly called a duplex is not the same entity as an ADU. An ADU by definition is a two-dwelling lot. So this definition should be deleted and changed to two-dwelling residential lot zoning district. Any zoning district where two dwellings on a single lot are allowed as of right by special permit, variance waiver, or other zoning relief or discretionary zoning approval. Two dwelling lots should never be subject to the same zoning regulations as a single dwelling lot. Unreasonable.
Mitchell, are you also speaking, Mitchell?
I just have one more question. Where, when and where will the transcript of this meeting be posted?
We'll cover that possibly at the end, but for now, focusing just on the comments.
Thank you.
Mitchell?
Thank you for allowing me to speak today. Mitchell Spate. I am a homeowner and land use advocate from Greenfield. And as Jonah said, we have submitted a full statement in writing. I am commenting first on the list of unreasonable regulations in these draft regulations. The list of unreasonable regulations in this section are arbitrary and capricious because they are not measurable and therefore subject to varying interpretation from municipality to municipality or court to court. What is the precise definition of a legitimate municipal interest? And what is an example of an illegitimate public interest? What is an example of a legitimate municipal interest that does not relate rationally to the municipal interest? Will there be an EOHLC office of irrational or illegitimate actions? The draft regulations suggest that an unreasonable regulation would be one that results in complete nullification of a protected use. There is case law regarding a local zoning decision that resulted in a reduced number of apartment units in a hotel, which did reduce the scale of the use, but did not totally nullify the use, limiting the scope of zones where an ADU could be permitted, and is not a complete nullification of an ADU use. The draft regulations also suggest that local regulations which impose excessive costs on the use or development of an ADU would be unreasonable. That's based on the developer's self-serving cost analysis. Developers often state that mitigation of harmful environment impacts are not feasible because of the costs. These sections all contain vague, subjective thresholds that will be hard to measure at the local level and difficult to determine in court action. The regs say that any design standard that is so restrictive, excessive, burdensome, and arbitrary that it prohibits renders infeasible the cost of the use of or construction of a protected use ADU is unreasonable. This string of at least 6 unmeasurable thresholds epitomizes what is wrong with the whole set of these 71 regulations. The section of dimensional standards state that any regulation is unreasonable concerning setbacks, lot size, lot coverage, open space, and the bulk and height of structures that are more restrictive than what is required for a single-family residential dwelling and a single-family residential zoning district in which the protected use ADU is located. Most municipalities have existing stables of dimensional requirements, which were designed for a one dwelling lot, not for 2 or more dwellings. My city, Greenfield, has had many years of table of dimension regulations that list the minimum lot frontage in feet and lot width, the front, side, and rear minimum yard in feet, a limit on building height, and minimum landscaped open space.
Thank you, Mitchell.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I believe you've also submitted comments, or if you haven't, you're welcome to do that as well. Thank you both very much. Next one we have here, just to confirm, Jennifer Ray, I've received note that you are not speaking, correct? Yes, okay, great. James Burke, not online. Zach McCain, still not online. Barbara Cooper.
Hi, thank you very much for calling on me. We will be submitting written comments as well. The we being town of Pelham in Western Massachusetts, less than 2,000 population and considered by many a suburb of Amherst. We certainly agree with most of the comments by the person, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name, who spoke for Amherst. We have 2-acre single-family zoning in most of our town. So we certainly welcome the opportunity to have more densely located housing. where our two concerns are that our population is primarily older retired people, and yet we are located near several universities, and there's a very extreme shortage of student housing, but we are not prepared to have our large lots become a cluster of small ADUs for students. So we're concerned about owner occupancy residence requirements for the principal dwelling or for the ADU. We feel that one of the buildings at least should be owner occupied. Because we have so many older residents who have affordability issues, we foresee having a large older home become a family-sized home and a new smaller ADU become the energy efficient, much more manageable home of an elderly resident. So we would like to see owner occupancy for either the principal dwelling or the ADU. And we also, yes, we are not as concerned about the plumbing and water issues. Most of the properties in Pelham have private wells and private sewer systems, and there's lots of regulations in place already that are both environmental and from the local Board of Health. And I think we're fine on that. I can't remember who brought that up. Let me see if I have anything else. Oh, and short-term rentals. Yes, we certainly are opposed to short-term rentals if that means people coming and going in less than, let's say, 6 months. I'm not sure what the state definition is for short-term rentals, but again, with our proximity to so many colleges and universities, we would much prefer to see the ADUs become housing for longer-term residents. And I think that covers my main points. We will have some other comments, as I said, that we will prepare in writing.
Thank you. We actually have 4 comments left today. Director Lacey?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you very much. First, a process question, or not a question, but a comment. I think it would have been good to have an open Q&A session at some point in this process earlier on. I think that could have answered some of the questions, and it would have been helpful. Anyway, I generally support ADUs. I'm a professional planner. I've written a number of ADU bylaws, quite liberal ones. And as a member of my planning board and zoning board, I've also approved a number of them. In fact, at one point in my town, we were building more ADUs per year than we were single-family dwellings, and I thought that was a good thing. I've submitted testimony, though, because I think these regulations go a little bit too far. The statutes, Section 7 and 8, were written imprecisely, and I think that imprecision can't be really addressed by essentially writing regulations that fill in the gaps and expand on the legislation. I think you need to work with what you've got in the statutes. My general comments are the applicability really should be to single family dwelling only zones. I followed this for years, and that was the perceived flaw. The problem was that there were housing diversity deserts where only single family dwellings were allowed. And this would be a measure to deal with that. And I think that's appropriate. The principal dwelling, that's a singular term, and that should be the single family only by right. If towns want to expand it to other types of dwellings, 2-family, 3-family, multifamily, they can do that at the town's discretion. And also the attached versus detached, the statute doesn't address that at all. And I think that's too big of a gap to fill in the regulations. I think at a minimum, attached or internal ADUs should be by right, but detached could be by right or by special permit based on municipal discretion. I have some other comments about the unreasonable regulations, but they're in my comments and I'm not going to address them here. But thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Robert Wachilla? Rob Wachilla?
Hi, thank you. Didn't think I was going to speak today. I'll keep my comments brief because I did submit a written statement on behalf of the town I work for. I'm the Director of Planning for the town of East Long Meadow, which is in Western Massachusetts near Springfield. And we are mostly a predominantly single-family residential type of community with some commercial districts. We actually immediately abut Springfield, so we get a lot of traffic coming from that direction on a daily basis. So one thing I wanted to kind of emphasize and get some clarity on in the future is the elimination of the owner occupancy requirements. So many folks around our region are seeing that as sort of problematic because that allows for a developer to come in to purchase a single family home and then to create a second unit without having to live in either building. And I think that's going to start a trend in the direction which might make it hard for folks, especially younger individuals, to become homeowners. And I just wanted to make that comment apparent. And I appreciate the time and allowing for public comment today. Thank you.
Thank you. Erica Roper?
You hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm a planner. I work in municipal government. I've worked in Massachusetts and Vermont. I'm speaking on behalf of myself today. I just want to be clear about that. We struggle a lot with one size fits all solutions. And it's clear that a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of thought has gone into these regulations. And I just wonder if there's an opportunity to figure out how to make it one size fits most, because it seems like these regulations really do meet the needs of a lot of our communities. And some of our communities seem to have less stringent regulations that they'd like to be able to apply as by right within this law. And it seems like they should have a mechanism to apply to the state to be approved for their less stringent regulations. And on the other side of things, there are cities and towns with specific conditions that may require variances, that do have reasonable issues that don't apply to many of the other communities in our state. And rather than try to change the whole law to apply to everyone, what's the mechanism that we can include to allow the communities that have legitimate concerns to apply to the state for a reasonable variance in their community of some sort? And I don't know what that would look like. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Douglas Helm?
Thank you very much. The opportunity to engage. Appreciate the thoughtful process that UHLC has engaged in with respect to developing these regulations, having information sessions, and hosting this hearing today. I'm here to speak on behalf of the town of Andover, only with respect to the technical aspects of these regulations, not advocate a specific position with respect to the overall law. I just want to, while we've submitted some written comments through our town manager, just want to underscore and emphasize two things that we respectfully ask that look at carefully. The first echoes some comments that you've heard earlier today about the definition of bus stations. And our principal concern from a planning and community development standpoint is that the radius, at least in our community, around a flagged bus route is potentially going to create some sort of transportation deserts that would really impact ADU occupants more than anyone else. The idea that they would be able to flag down a bus on Route 133, for example, which primarily services a Raytheon complex in the IRS building in Andover, is difficult for us to foresee as being feasible because there's frankly just not the pedestrian access points that you would expect to see around transportation for folks that would really be relying on bus network to get to work and to meet the needs of their daily lives. So we've suggested a few things in our written comments that might help further define bus routes for the purposes of ADUs that are emphasized maybe allowing us to plan around either fixed stations or stations that have service within a certain frequency range that would ensure that folks who are occupying ADUs aren't in a difficult position of having to rely on some other form of transportation like rideshare to get home if they don't have sufficient parking, particularly in a community that has overnight parking ban or snow and ice removal in the wintertime. The second thing I just wanted to touch upon briefly, it's also in our comment, but I've heard a few folks talk about today, is just the conceptual tension here about condominiums. From the town of Andover's perspective, the law is written to contemplate a principal and an accessory unit. And a condo is not an accessory unit. It shares the same principal rights as any other unit within a condominium, and both for tax purposes and other purposes. We have a concern that that's not what the law sort of contemplates, and it may be something that's fruitful to explore ways that we can expand condoization opportunities consistent with or amending the Massachusetts Condominium Act. That doesn't seem to be contemplated by the law here, and we'd actually ask that that ADUs not be allowed to be condoized because they're supposed to be accessory structures more than just from an architectural standpoint, from a legal standpoint. Thank you again. Overall, we believe that these draft regulations very much clarify the status of the law, and we appreciate the work that you've put in a very short period of time to pull these together under a statute that left some ambiguities for you to resolve. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we have Andrew Stewart.
Thank you very much. My name is Andrew Stewart. I'm the building commissioner for the town of Marshfield, which is a South Shore coastal community that contains a large swath of non-conforming lots and structures, many seasonal homes and short-term rentals, and over 40% of our town is located in a flood zone. I'd like to echo previous comments about identifying that ADUs should only be allowed by right on a property with an existing or proposed single-family dwelling in any district that is not specifically a single-family district, but allows single-family dwellings. I'd also like to echo the comments about striking the words variance, waiver, or other discretionary zoning approval from the definition of the single-family zoning district, as this opens it up to everything. It's not clear in the regulations or in the law whether or not a municipality's existing setback and dimensional requirements, such as height for accessory structures, will remain as reasonable regulations as it applies to a protected use ADU. It's also not clear whether or not a number of bedrooms restriction will be considered reasonable or unreasonable. Under unit caps and density in Chapter 7103, Section 2D, it states that protected use ADUs shall not be counted in any density calculations. And I would like it clarified if this means that protected use ADUs will not be counted against our affordable housing stock regarding 40B development. It should be clear that building codes requiring updates for energy efficiency, flood resistant construction, and especially fire protection due to proximity to a lot line that are triggered from a building code change of use and occupancy, from a storage or utility use of a detached garage or other accessory structure to a single family residential use, and that a denial based on the structure's inability to attain those standards shall not be considered unreasonable regulations. It is not clear in 7103 Section 5 due to the use of the word shall if this is a mandate that all municipalities have to create a special permit process, or if they can just prohibit multiple ADUs by simply not creating a special permit process. It should be clear that municipalities may create a special permit process for ADUs larger than 900 square feet, as well as multiple ADUs. It may help to add a definition for a special use ADU that can be larger than 900 square feet, that separates it from a protected use and that's allowed by right. Concerning the definition of a short-term rental, the definition of occupancy in 64G Section 1 states that occupancy of a short-term rental is defined as the rental of a house, cottage, condo, or apartment scheduled ahead of time for a period not to exceed 31 days. I believe that the combined definitions of occupant, occupancy, and short-term rentals in 64G Section 1 is what limits short-term rentals to 31 days. So perhaps the definition of occupant and occupancy should also be referenced in the definition of short-term rental and the regulations to avoid confusion and give municipalities the ability to fall back on something concrete regarding the 31-day limit. Lastly, I understand it's not something that this group can address, but my community is also extremely concerned about this law prohibiting owner occupancy requirements for properties with protective use ADUs, and I'd encourage everyone to reach out to their local and state representatives to try to enact change in this aspect of the law. Thanks so much for this theory. Thanks so much for the website and all the information that you put up ahead of time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.
Alyssa, last but not least.
Hi, thank you. I will speak quickly. I appreciate the opportunity. I echo a lot of the concerns about dimensions, definitions, parking. One thing that I just wanted to mention is that I would really appreciate the state including language to consider climate resiliency. I'm sorry, I didn't mention that I am from Winthrop, Massachusetts. We are coastal. We have a lot of issues with our existing storm drains and infrastructure. And we don't have, I don't see protections for trees, for drainage from new buildings, mitigating stormwater on site, and protecting any new utilities from potential rising flood zones. So including any of that language, I just feel like would be best practice at this point. A lot of municipalities have older zoning ordinances that don't yet address these things, and it's costly and time consuming to make those updates. And I feel that if the state is going to impose these zoning restrictions on all municipalities, it would be really helpful if it were forward thinking and protecting communities from further damage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, 12:34. With that, thank you all very much for participating in this public hearing today. And once again, a reminder, if you have something, whether it's a picture and any sort of image or other documentation or materials you would like to submit as additional comments, you may visit www.mass.gov/ADU comments or just mass.gov/ADU to be able to provide us any additional information you may have. With that, final remarks. Over.
Well, okay. Following this hearing, EUHOC will be, we're going to be taking these comments from today, and we're taking the comments that you submit. As a reminder, you can submit them before midnight tonight. Please do so. We'll be going through them all weekend. And after considering them, EUHOC will be making, will make any further revisions that we need to make to the regulations as appropriate. EOHLC intends to publish the final version of the regulation into the Mass Register, where it will be promulgated and become effective prior to the full effective day of the ADU law, which is February 2nd, 2025. I think that's it. Everything. There was a question earlier about the transcript.
Oh, that's
right.
right.
We have an answer.
Posted online. It was a question of this recording.
The recording, and there will be a transcript made as well.
Figure that out still when that goes up.
Okay.
There's an outstanding question whether this hearing today, it is a public record, as I understand. However, we're not sure if it is going to go live on mass.gov. If it does go live, it'll probably be going live along with further documentation that will be shared publicly with everybody who's registered today, as well as the general public. So a great question.
I'm sure it'll get linked to the AD website.
Exactly. There's a very likelihood that it will be linked on the mass.gov/edu page as well for folks who would like to review the information I was spoken here today. With that, thank you very much. We will close this hearing effectively 12:36.